Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome Korean War veteran Ralph Yost, and we thank him for his service to our country and to our church. Ralph, appreciate your coming and being a part of this veterans interview project that we have here in our church. We've identified quite a few. We have already interviewed 18 of the World War II veterans, and now we are, of course, looking at you and some other veterans in our church who were involved in the Korean War. Let me ask you at the beginning, did you volunteer for service, or were you drafted? How did that work for you? You volunteered?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I had 2.5 years reserve at Willow Grove Naval Air Station.
Naval Reserve. Naval Reserve.
That was Naval Reserve, and then volunteered for regular duty.
Regular service.
Yes, sir.
And how long then were you in the Navy?
6.5 years total.
Altogether. So
yes, sir.
2.5 in the Naval Reserve, and then 4 years during the Korean War, I presume.
Yes, sir.
All during that period of time. Okay. Tell me a little bit about your experience in basic training.
Well, that was in San Diego, California.
Oh, okay.
And that was what we used to call boot camp.
Yes.
And still is, I'm sure.
Yes.
But it was quite an experience in itself.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
What was one of the most interesting, challenging experiences you had in boot camp?
Well, having had some military experience prior to boot camp.
In the reserve.
Yeah. The second 3 weeks of boot camp were in La Mesa, California. And one of the outstanding things there were the dust, number one, and rattlesnakes.
The dust and the rattlesnakes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I don't know how that was why that was a part of the experience, but I can imagine it's something that you would never forget.
No, sir. No.
Yeah. You had to watch out for those rattlesnakes.
Yeah, watch out for the rattlesnakes.
Were you in pup tents, or you were in Quonset huts? How were you housed there?
We were in the basic buildings in San Diego, California.
Okay.
The boot camps were regular buildings.
Yes.
Large.
Okay. Well, I can remember in my own experience, boot camp in Great Lakes Naval Training Center, they were like you're talking about.
Yes.
They were regular buildings.
Right.
Did you do some rifle range?
Oh yes, I was a marksman with
that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the carbine, M1 and 45.
Okay. You said 6 weeks. 6 weeks of boot camp.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there? Well, you already told about the snakes, so I guess that was the most memorable and most challenging experience you had. But the experience out on the trails and the rifle range and all of that.
Yes, sir.
Still very much fresh in your memory, I'm sure.
Yeah, there's quite a few memories.
Yes.
I'm sure I couldn't, give you all of them, but I know some of the guys that were giving details to use a toothbrush to clean the sidewalks and so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Special.
When they did something wrong, they paid for it that way.
Special assignments like guarding the garbage can.
Oh yeah, yep, absolutely.
But it taught us to obey whatever the assignment was and carry it out to the best of our ability.
Right.
Talking about challenges, I guess the biggest challenge I had in boot camp was maybe surprising to you perhaps, because you probably could do this easily. But the one thing that was really tough for me was climbing a rope, just a single rope. Did you have to do rope climbing?
Oh yes.
Okay.
Then dive off boards like you do off the side of a ship.
Side of a ship, you practice that.
Yeah, you just peel over and go down.
Yes, and If you didn't know how to swim, you did when you came out of there, too, didn't you?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, good. Where were you assigned when you completed boot camp?
North Island Naval Air Station, San Diego, California.
In San Diego?
They shipped me right across the bay.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And I was in electronics in the reserve, and so I became an ATAN, and that put me into that category. So I was working on aircraft, F4U4s basically, and the electronic equipment.
Okay. Were you assigned to a ship?
Not at that point in
Not at
time,
that
no.
point.
Just based ashore, NAS.
Okay,
Yeah.
and electronics. Did this have to do with such things as radar?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of the biggest things was the IFF gear, identification friend and foe. And we had to go in, and on the F4U4, it had a 1-inch steel plate behind the pilot, which protected him from aircraft in the rear. And we had to raise that up to get to the IFF gear. And yeah, we had to check it out, make sure it was okay, and
Yes.
we make sure that there were little pellets of ammunition. If the aircraft ever went down, the pilot had to just kill the insides of the IFF gear, so enemy couldn't get a hold
Oh,
of
I
it.
see, yes.
Yeah.
And then did you go out to sea?
No, actually I was transferred to NAS Jacksonville, O&R, overhaul and repair. So
Naval Air
station,
Station,
Jacksonville,
NAS.
Florida.
Jacksonville, Florida, all the way
Yes, sir.
across the country.
Yes.
And what was your assignment there in Jacksonville?
Well, electronics, aviation electronics.
But is that where you went aboard ship?
No.
No?
That
Okay.
came later on.
All right.
But overhaul and repair was basically taking care of all the gear in the P2Vs, the S2Fs, the ADs, anything that happened to be stationed there, and whether it came in from, well, matter of fact, we had a Canadian Lancaster come in from Canada, and they requested us to go in and check some of their gear, which we did. So
I see.
a lot of experience. And,
Sounds like it, yes.
Unique.
You were well trained in the electronics field then
Yeah.
through your naval experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Specifically.
And,
There were a number of stories that I could tell relative to my experiences there. One was a chief AP pilot. I went up with him one day, and he wasn't commissioned, and they did have the chief APs at that point in time. We were in an AD, and
AP,
AD,
AD.
yeah,
And
yeah,
what
single engine. It
A-
was the largest single engine aircraft in the fleet.
Okay.
And so we were up there, and I was checking out the radio gear, and all of a sudden I looked at the altimeter, and it was accelerating upwards, and the airspeed was going down quite a bit, and he stalled that aircraft.
Oh, my.
And, well, that was one experience
I'm
that
sure.
I surely remember.
Oh, I can imagine, yes. Well, what was the result of that?
Nothing. I just
He corrected.
went back to the vault, which we called the electronics room, if you will, and just stood there and shivered a little bit.
Oh, boy, I can imagine. Well, when you went up you were in a squadron.
Pardon me?
You were in were you looking for enemy submarines or any other?
That was my third duty.
Oh, your third duty?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
And you want to proceed there,
It's up to you, yeah.
happened in Key West. I was transferred to Key West, Florida,
Key West, Florida.
and to the anti-submarine squadron, HS-1.
Okay.
And what we did, at that point in time, I became a sonar person.
Okay.
And we would go out and dropped the sonar ball in the Atlantic and ping around for. We picked up all kinds of fish. You know, the sharks were when they came at the sonar ball. One day I was had the ball in the water about 25 feet, something like that, and it had to be a 15-foot shark, and came up and put his nose up against the ball. And because the water was so clear, I could see this happening. And it was very interesting because I was waiting for him to take a bite of the sonar ball. The piezoelectric crystals which send out the signal were encased in castor oil. And so I was waiting to see if he took a bite of that and see what would happen to him. But anyway, that was very interesting.
Was this a practice to lead you to do the same type thing with regard to enemy?
Yeah, well, we went out, matter of fact, we did temporary base to shore. I had a year and 7 months and 3 days sea duty. And what they would do, they would transport us to Norfolk, Virginia, and put us on a carrier, CV-108, USS Kula Gulf. And we would go out with the cruisers and destroyers and occasionally a battleship. And what they would do with our particular squadron, which was it was called the HRS helicopter.
HRS, meaning helicopter?
Yeah. Some called it the HO4S. We called it the horse. And,
okay.
Yeah, pretty much so what it was. And we would go out ahead of the convoy and drop the sonar ball probably about 15 miles out. And we'd put the ball down and we'd start pinging.
Checking for submarines?
Yes, searching for submarines. We had, at one instance, there was a submarine that was our submarine, and they were trying to maneuver in to make a contact with some of our ships. And fortunately, I got this pinging. It was a ping, ping, and he was coming straight at us, at the ball. And so when he came pretty close, he was probably about maybe a quarter of a mile, I would think, and he suddenly turned. Well, I was able to maneuver the gear that I was working on, and I tracked him. He had done a right face, basically, you know, starboard. And then I told the pilot what had happened, where he was going, and so forth and so on. Destroyer was able, they were contacted the destroyer, and the destroyer was able to get up over the submarine. And what they did, they would drop hand grenades. And the hand grenade, based on the sound as it came to the submarine, the captain had to acknowledge whether it was a good shot. And so I got a commendation for that.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Well, was this an enemy sub or your own?
No, that was a
your
U.S.
own?
sub. That was a practice sub.
Practice
He was trying to get into the convoy and take out a couple ships. You know, he would go with what would be the torpedoes, that sort of thing, and so forth. So
had it been the real?
Had it been a real thing, we would have been ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, did you have some experiences with the enemy sub?
No.
Okay.
No. Not that I know. We had a lot of.
You were still in the Atlantic, weren't you, at that point?
In the Atlantic, yes,
So,
off of basically out of Norfolk. We would go a little bit south and head towards the Mediterranean. We never would get there, but that was the purpose.
Did you go around?
Exercise.
Did you go to the Pacific?
No.
Okay.
No, only the San Diego Bay. Well, I used to swim in the Pacific when I was there, and that is cold water.
Yes.
Ice cold water. But yeah, so it was. But one of my experiences, I guess, was in 1954, Hurricane Hazel, which devastated the United States somewhat.
Yes.
We were right in the middle of it. We couldn't get away from it. And so what they did with the carrier was do a 5-mile radius. In other words, turning around. And there were times when we were at the top of the waves. And then there were times that we were down.
In the trough. So
In
to
the
speak.
trough. And actually, what had happened, Jack, was they put a 60-foot scrape on the bottom of that carrier.
60 foot.
60-foot scrape. When it went down in the hollow, and we were 100 miles offshore, off North Carolina, and it put a 60-foot scrape. They took it up to Philadelphia and took it up out of the water and verified the 60-foot scrape.
Now, what you're calling it a scrape? What is it? What is that?
When we hit the ground
Oh, okay.
at a 100 miles offshore,
You were actually.
so it just
because-
dropped.
all right,
It just dropped that low where it
The
scraped.
ocean was so rough at that point
Obviously,
that you
And-
actually
and-
touched bottom.
yes. And when I saw all the old salts just going around cringing, I jumped in my rack and stayed there for a little while.
All right.
But it was amazing what the hurricane did. The Admiral's Ladder, which is right by the conning tower, it's 3/4-inch steel, and it was bent.
Yeah. Okay.
And the hangar door had corrugated steel door, and it was backed by 4x4 timbers. And a wave came through just like a hoop of paper. So you can imagine the concern that we
Sure.
had.
Oh, yes. But you wrote it out.
Wrote it out, yeah.
Okay. For the benefit of some folks that would not understand some of the terminology, what you were discussing there about I'm not quite sure now how to pronounce it even, but explain some of the terminology that you just got through using.
You mean the sonar? And
Well, yeah, the sonar. and
Yeah,
I know what sonar is.
Yeah, well,
You
yeah.
get reverberations from.
Yeah, you send out a signal,
Signal.
and based on the return,
You know how far it is from you.
yes, and whether it's approaching you or going away from you.
Okay.
So if it's ping, ping, it's coming towards you, and ping, ping, it's going away from
Going
you.
away. Okay.
And you can determine pretty much just exactly what was happening with it. And I enjoyed that
Yeah.
very much.
Good. And that was
I
part
enjoyed my
of your
service.
responsibility, working with the sonar
Yes,
and other technology experiences that you had.
yes, sir.
Which led you to other things.
Pardon?
Which prepared you for some things after service, I suspect. Didn't that help prepare you for life after work?
Everything, basically.
It prepared you for
Yes.
life that followed.
There was an instance in NES Jacks, for instance, where I was in a C-47 or an R-4D Navy terminology, and we were up flying around. I was checking all the gear out, making sure the radios were functioning, and we had what we called a trailing wire antenna. There was an 8-pound lead ball on the bottom of this trailing wire, and you would let it out, and you could talk to anywhere around the globe.
Oh,
Even at that time, that was amazing because we didn't have the satellites
Yes.
and so forth.
sure.
And so I was working on the gear, and it was right behind where the pilot and co-pilot were, and I could see out the front. And I just happened to look up. I had the trailing wire antenna out at about, it was about 60 feet. And I looked up to the pilot, and we're coming in for a landing. The pilot never told me the ball, the trailing wire antenna and the ball came through Navy housing on the approach to the airport. And he never told me that we were coming in. And I went back to the ball again, and I sat, and I was very concerned that maybe I accidentally killed someone with that ball, because that 8-pound ball would go through a house like nobody's business. But nothing happened, and so praise the Lord.
Well, how did you apply the knowledge you gained to your career after you got out of the
Well, I
service?
had a number of careers, basically. I had my own
You're a versatile
radio.
guy.
Pardon me?
You are a versatile individual. You have a lot of talents.
Well, sir, yes, and I trust the Lord's going to use that. But yeah, I had after I got out of the Navy in 1954, I went to Sebring, Florida, and started a radio TV business. And then things went kind of sour on that with some things that transpired in another company there in town. Then I went to work with the 8th Air Depot, which rebuilt aircraft engines. I enjoyed that. Well, I'm a pilot, and I love aircraft, and I love to fly. And consequently, I did a lot of things there that enabled me to see a lot of different aspects. In other words, I took a big old Browning machine, and I would drill the holes for the valves in the engines. And I would build up the ears. We used to puddle aluminum. You don't weld aluminum, you puddle it.
Puddle it.
Puddle it, yes, sir. So that was very interesting.
I'm sure.
Then after that, I had an incident where my back kind of went out, and so I was off for a short while with that, and they found out that I had 2 pieces of bone missing in my spine, 5th and 6th lumbar, congenital. It was always there. I never knew it. But anyway, we were members of Southside Baptist Church at that time.
And still in Sebring,
In
Florida.
Sebring, yes. And the pastor had graduated from Baptist Bible College in Johnson City, New York. Well, he kind of got to me, and I finally, while I was enabled to work at that point in time, it looked like a good time. So, yeah, at that time, I went to, in 1959, went to Johnson City and went to Baptist Bible Seminary and college, and I graduated in 65.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. And you
But the Lord was good.
You were also working some, I presume, during that period.
Yeah, I had to.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yes.
Of course, I was taking 18 hours, credit hours, but I was able to do my radio and TV experience. And a lot of people at the church I went to passed the word around a little bit, so that helped us.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And you went into the corporate world, I believe, with IBM?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the situation was my wife at that time had 12 major surgeries, and she was having a very difficult time. And consequently, one of the persons at the church, Calvary Baptist Church in Johnson City, New York, was a senior manager at IBM. And he approached me one day, knowing my circumstances with the wife, and he asked me if I would be interested. They were looking for some people, and
I see.
so I went and spent 25 years with
25
IBM.
years with IBM, great company.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, let me go back just a minute
Surely.
to your naval experience. I'm not knowledgeable enough to be able to interpret all of these things, but
Sure.
you were on a carrier, but you actually were assigned to flying as a part of a crew of a helicopter, was it?
Yeah, we were temporarily based on the carrier.
Temporarily based
Yeah.
on the carrier.
We had sea duty at one point,
Sea duty,
1
yeah.
year, 7 months, 3 days, something like that. And so we were temporarily based on the carrier to perform anti-submarine
I see.
work.
That was your responsibility.
Yes, it was.
Track those submarines. But
Yeah.
if you ran into enemy ones, you certainly would take care of them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. If that one that I had got commended for
Yeah.
would have been an enemy submarine, that would have been a real plus.
You know, Ralph, it was intriguing listening to you talk about at the beginning when you started doing that. I assume it was practice when you were actually dealing with the sharks. Was that a part of your training, your practice? Was that a practice toward becoming skilled in?
Well, we had ships movement in Key West. There was a submarine based unit there. It was a huge ship, and it had all the submarines lined up alongside it, and it would take care of all the data and so forth that transpired through them. And so we had people moving quite a bit out of there.
But what you were doing was flying with a crew on a helicopter, was it?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
There was just one sonar man, and the pilot and co-pilot.
And you were the sonar man.
I was the sonar man. I'll tell you one story that was
Okay.
very interesting. We were out, and an admiral had come down from Norfolk, and he was Comm Air Lant of the Atlantic, and so he wanted to be in a helicopter, so he went out, and I just happened to be with him, and the pilot and the admiral were up in the cockpit,
Yeah.
and I was down there on sonar, and so we were out there pinging, if you will, and
Flying around in a helicopter.
yeah, I was just, well, we hover,
Hover,
and
okay.
we dropped the sonar ball.
Yeah.
And anyway, I was pinging around, trying to find something. I looked out the door. There was a hatch that we left open all the time. In case something happened, we'd get out. But the water was lapping the wheels on the helicopter.
You were
Yes.
just above the waterline.
Yeah, well, we used to be about 20 feet, 25 feet above the water, but
Okay.
he wasn't pulling enough pressure to keep it. So I called up as Admiral, sir, can you raise this thing up a little bit so I can concentrate? Yeah, and they laughed about that when I got back aboard the carrier.
I'll bet. They didn't realize.
Yeah.
Well, that's
But
interesting.
he thanked me for letting him know that he was
Good.
it dropped down.
Well, there were many, many responsibilities in the Korean War
Yes, sir.
to be accomplished, and
Yes, sir.
we did the job, and you did your job that was assigned to you, and
Yes,
you
sir.
did it well,
I
and
did.
I'm sure you feel good about it.
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
good.
I was very pleased.
Well,
that,
good. Anything else you would care to add to our conversation this morning?
well, in respect to what the Lord's done for me,
Whatever.
he's
whatever you
been
like.
good,
Yeah, it's been good.
paid in full.
Paid in full. That's what it said, huh? Paid in full. Well, Ralph, we thank you for your presence here this morning. I want to express our appreciation to what you're doing in our church. I know you're very active in our church choir, the sanctuary choir, and you're involved in other ways as well.
Yes,
and we appreciate that. We thank you for your service to our country during the Korean War.
Praise the Lord.
Thank you, and best wishes.
Jack, thank you.
Yes, sir.